All right, hello, Master Gardener trainee or newbie. Hopefully, you've had a good restful little nap or break from part one and are refreshed and ready to go for part two because we are really going to get into some details about some palm problems that are unfortunately becoming more and more common here in Central Florida. And this is part two of palm problems. All right, disease triangle. This may be a new concept. It may be something that you're hearing again, depending on where you are in our modules at this point in time. But the disease triangle is a universally accepted kind of diagram of what's going on out there in the plant disease world in our plants. We have three things that are required for disease to develop. I particularly like this version of the disease triangle, partially because if you look in the lower left-hand part of the slide, it's from my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin. Go Gators! So shout out to the to them versus the Gators. Anyhow, most of you have probably learned at some point or have heard in other modules that we need three things for disease, which we call the disease triangle. We need a pathogen. May I ask you to write down virulent, 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 something that is capable of producing a disease. You need a susceptible host, and you need a favorable environment. Now in this diagram versus some of the others, you can just see right in the middle where it says disease. Just because you have a favorable environment and susceptible host doesn't mean you're going to get a disease. Sometimes you may have the pathogen in such a small amount that the plant won't get a disease. So everything has to come together just right for the disease to develop in any particular plant. In this case, we're going to be talking about palms in this module. But again, disease is not the norm. A lot of people think disease is always common and something we have to be beating back on our plants. If it's something that's that common you have to be beating back on the plants all the time with fungicides, maybe it's not the right plant in the right place. Something to think about. Ganoderma butt rot. Now this is one that would be very hard to diagnose by looking at this canopy. If you send a photograph to me after many years of being a horticulturist and with extension, I would look at that and go, yeah, it's sick and yeah, it's probably going to die. What's the cause, Jim? Don't have a whole lot to go on other than the canopy is collapsing. But this is a lethal disease of palms. All palms are considered host of this particular fungus. This fungus is not a primary pathogen of other plant species. This is true of many diseases that they are host specific, but there are some that are just opportunistic, but that will be discussed in the plant pathology modules. There is no method that can determine if a palm is infected with Ganoderma. Notice Ganoderma butt rot is a genus, zonatum. So Ganoderma butt rot. Now where are you going butt rot? Well, what part of the plant do you think is starting to rot first? Okay, the butt, but ha ha ha. Are we really in third grade still? The base of the palm is what we're talking about, the butt. Ganoderma butt rot is probably best diagnosed when you see these conchs forming at the base of the trunk. As you probably have learned in other modules, by the time you see the fruiting body of a fungus, it's the end of the line for the fungus, not the beginning. Of course, most people think this is how they start. This is how they finish off life. They're sporulating, or if you wish, spawning, quote, quote, kind of like fish or something, and pretty much the fungus has eaten the base of the plant, used that for its food energy, has rotted it sufficiently where there's no more food for the fungus to keep feeding, so it says, hey, I better move on and procreate my species, and sends out a fruiting body that sends spores out into the atmosphere to hopefully find another host. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Of course, I'm being facetious. Or is that sarcasm? I'll let you figure that out, maybe look it up, maybe even pause the module to figure out which way that should go. But anyhow, the best way to diagnose it is when you see the conchs. It's also called a basidiocarp, but conch is good enough for us to remember, us mere mortals who aren't plant pathology geeks. Sorry, Dr. Whitney. Anyhow, the point I'm trying to make is these don't last a very long time. They only may be there for a few days, a few weeks, and at which time the fruiting body rots away, leaving with no evidence to go on. Now, some people may be able to diagnose it if they start sectioning the tree from the base up. Um, if we look at the photograph on the right-hand side of the screen, the upper left-hand cross section, that's the stem cut across looking down at it, we can see it's fairly dark brown, especially in the center, and a medium brown fairly uniformly through the base of this particular palm species. And if we go up a foot or two and make another cross section, we can see really the center is quite dark and the outer periphery is not quite as dark as the section just below it. You section up another foot or so, and you can see that the disease hasn't progressed quite as far up the trunk quite yet. And by the time you get a couple of feet, 3 or 4, whatever that is, at the lower right-hand cross section, you can see that the stem doesn't even look infected. So depending on what picture someone were to send to you, if they send you at the middle of the trunk and it looks like that, you couldn't even tell that it was Ganoderma butt rot. But you can see that the plant is starting to rot away with the dark discoloration. Now, if we remember back to the botany modules, we remember that the xylem and phloem in a monocot, especially a palm tree, parenthetically speaking, is scattered about the stem, or randomly, kind of like pepperoni is on a pizza. But as you can see at the upper left-hand cross section in the picture, that whole stem has pretty much plugged up and no longer can move water and nutrients properly in the plant. Hence the canopy is declining. Best way to control Ganoderma butt rot is not through spraying. There are currently no chemical recommendations on prevention or disease control in the infected palm. Even trying to inject, say, a fungicide into this plant would be pretty ineffective because the vessels that would move the solution up or down, depending on which conductive tissue it's targeting, would be blocked by the fact that the fungus has already occluded or plugged up the plumbing system of the palm. So the best thing to do is to remove the palm soon after the conchs appear and grind out as much of the root system wherever it's possible. So Ganoderma butt rot has been known for a very long time in Florida, well before I ever moved here. Then a few new quote diseases came into Florida starting in the early 2000s, shortly after I entered Extension. So here's another section that I've cobbled together from several PowerPoints over the years. New palm diseases in Florida. Is it safe to plant a palm? That's a really good question that Dr. Monica Elliott, who wrote much of this section, poses to us today. So we've had other palm diseases, primarily in South Florida, but again, they're relatively host specific, and many of them are lethal. The first one that some of you, if you lived in Florida for a long time or lived in South Florida, where coconut palms are commonly planted either for food for people in their backyard or for that matter as a tree on the beach, etc. Lethal yellowing came into Florida. It's abbreviated LY, lethal yellowing, sometime in the 1970s. And it's a bacterium. Then we got another one that showed up in about late 2006 on our radar. Started in Phoenix palms, Phoenix spus, and it got the common name Texas Phoenix palm decline, TPPD for short. While I may say TPPD throughout this module, as a Master Gardener newbie and trainee and soon to be seasoned Master Gardener in time, you should know that stands for Texas Phoenix palm decline, which is a lethal disease of several palm species, primarily in the genus Phoenix. These are both bacterial diseases. In the case of Texas Phoenix palm decline, that's where I'm specifically going with the next 3 bullet points with species. Texas Phoenix palm decline affects our Phoenix spus, Canary Island date, date palm, Sylvester palm, and a couple other Phoenix spus. Syriacus is a queen palm, and our sable palmetto, our cabbage palm, our state tree, parenthetically speaking, tree. As we know, it's a big old grass in the grand scheme of the planet since it's a monocot. But here our state tree is a susceptible host to a virulent pathogen. Okay, so lethal yellowing, LY, and TPPD are phytoplasmas. I don't expect you to remember that, but what does that mean? It's a bacterium without a cell wall. Citrus greening is also like that. But that's an aside note, and you learned that in the citrus modules. It's not culturable. This makes it difficult to study in the laboratory or out, for that matter, in the environment to try to figure out how to control the problem better. So it's detected with molecular techniques, aka DNA. I think we all know what DNA is since the O.J. Simpson trial. Phytoplasms in this case are found in the food or phloem moving vascular tissue. That may not be true of all phytoplasms, but in the case of lethal yellowing and Texas phoenix palm decline, it is. It is transmitted only by phloem feeding insects. Generally, this is an insect with piercing, sucking mouth parts. Texas phoenix palm decline in Florida is identical match with material from Corpus Christi, Texas, from the 2000s. Let's think about this a second. That's how it got its common name Texas, because we linked it back to Texas originally. Now, how did it get to Florida? Well, maybe the insect flew across the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the insect we think may be doing it is a plant hopper, which is a relatively small insect. That's a long distance journey to fly across the Gulf of Mexico to find food. Now it could have been blown, those insects could have been in Texas and blown by a tropical storm, or for that matter, a hurricane. That's a possible theory. What are some other theories that you might have running around your head? Sure, you can grow, we have similar growing conditions to Corpus Christi, Texas. And if we have a shortage of certain species of palms, we may put them on a boat or a ship and ship them across the Gulf of Mexico, for all I know. And then they land on the shores of Tampa Bay or wherever the port is. That's a possible theory. Or possibly they are loaded up into a big old truck, a semi-truck, and then driven across I-10 down the peninsula. And then these plants with the insects were brought to Florida. No one really can say for sure with any authority as to exactly how it got here, but it did get here from Texas. It is sensitive to tetracycline antibiotics, as is true with citrus greening. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. Texas phoenix palm decline, TPPD, its initial symptoms, among others, is fruit drop. Look at the left-hand photograph. You can see kind of the reddish-brown, kind of looks feathery. Those were where the flowers were originally attached and the fruit started forming. Well, it's dropped to the ground. You can't quite see it on the ground in this particular photograph, but the fruit has aborted. That's unusual. Even in our high humidity, we'll get some fruit to develop on our various phoenix palm species. The next initial symptom on the leaves is chlorosis. Now, chlorosis, as we have learned in other modules, means yellowing. And you can just see a touch of yellowing happening. Now, if you look there, you may see a little orange. I think that's a tide tag for this particular class that's touring a nursery or wherever this is, a research center, so they could find it later to show the class. So, but chlorosis, a lot of things can cause lower leaves or leaves to start turning yellow. Think of nutrient deficiencies. But this is going to happen a little bit quicker than nutrient deficiency, so kind of keep that in the back of your mind. The next more severe symptomology that you're going to see if you're driving around is that you'll have more necrotic or dead lower leaves than would be normal. And we can see in the left-hand picture there are an awful lot of lower leaves that are completely brown in this photograph. And if we look closer at that same picture at the lower right-hand side, and you can see the oval. Can you see in the middle there's kind of a brownish spear or point? That is a dead spear leaf. This means that the heart of the palm is already dead. The game is already over for this particular palm. Now, a lot of people want to wait and see if it's going to get better. Maybe they even nickname these plants Lazarus, for all I know. But again, once that spear leaf is brown or has flopped over, in probably a few weeks that'll flop over, the game has been over for already a few weeks in this particular photographs that we see here. These plants also have root decay, but that would be hard for us as master gardeners to see, especially in any kind of photography that we're given. Now, the problem with trying to diagnose Texas Phoenix palm decline, Phoenix palms have a lot of leaves that can hide the spear leaf and make it difficult to see if it's alive or dead. So it is a tricky one to diagnose just via photographs, especially if they're not taken at the right angle. Or worse yet, people like to have the sun coming right into the camera lens so the lens closes down and is all nice and dark. Thanks, people. Here's a sable palm or a cabbage palm, and you can see there are a lot of lower leaves that are brown. In fact, these look a little more coppery in color than what I normally would see. Notice the spear leaf. It has partially unfurled but has turned brown. This palm is already essentially dead. It'll be a matter of time before the remainder of the green leaves will take on a coppery color and eventually turn brown, with the whole canopy finally dead. This should be removed at this stage as it serves as a potential cesspool, if you will, for the disease to be there, for insects to feed and move on to healthy plants. Oh, a computer woke up from a nap. Kind of like you guys just did a few minutes ago, huh? Here is a better picture of that coppery color. This only lasts a day or two. It's a very bright color in person. Here it's a little duller than what I like to try to show you, but again, notice it's not brown like some of those other leaves closer to the camera lens, but this coppery color. Coppery color means bad on a lot of plants. We may have told you the story of a winged elm we had here at the extension office, and after Hurricane Irma, we walked in one day and kind of went, looked a little different. By the afternoon, I walked out and went, Whitney, and we both noticed the beginning of that coppery color on the leaves. Well, the next morning we came in and she was a listing. Oopsie, we knew what that meant and we had to get rid of it. So coppery colors are not good, especially on some of these diseases that we see. Oh, as far as the winged elm, that was due to wind damage to the tree. It had wiggled back and forth, damaging the root system. So different reason, but similar symptomology when you have some issues in the vascular system for whatever reason. Here are palms, and people will send us lots of photographs and want to know what to do with them. The two on the left-hand side, the upper and lower, are already dead. Notice the number of brown leaves, and there's essentially only 2 or 3 green ones left. Now, it's hard to tell if the spear leaf is alive or dead in these photographs, but again, this palm is beyond any rejuvenation or any kind of treatment. Obviously, the picture in the upper right-hand photograph is also seriously declining, and it has only a matter of a few days or weeks left of any green. Now, the lower right-hand photograph is a little hard to tell. Is that a disease, or is that, for that matter, a nutritional problem? Without being able to see that spear leaf, that may be very hard for us as newbies or uninitiated to make a complete answer. That could be diagnosed with sampling of trunk tissue. Not sure if it's worth it, though. Again, here's a sequence of symptoms on Phoenix palm species, or Phoenix spus. Flower death. Now, sometimes they're not flowering at certain times of the year. Followed by fruit drop. Minimal, if any, leaf chlorosis. Oh, I know what we're saying here. It starts turning brown pretty quickly after that coppery color. but the early first few days will show a yellow, followed by the copper, and then rapidly turn brown. The spear leaf dies early in the disease for Texas Phoenix palm decline. If we look at this picture, look at the center frond that's fairly green. Look at to the left of that, and you can see two unopened spear leaves. They're kind of a yellowish brown in this particular photograph. Those are the spear leaves that failed to open. They are dead. Then what will happen is the remaining leaves will die from the bottom upward. This plant should be removed immediately to prevent spread to the phoenix palm right next to it to the left that's just barely seen in this photograph. But people will wait to see if maybe. I guess they like the name Lazarus more than I do. Here is a queen palm, the Texas Phoenix palm decline. Now you notice queen palms don't have nearly the foliage as the Phoenix spuz, so it's sometimes a little easier in photography to see the fact that the spear leaf is already dead. Can you see the arrow isn't quite pointing exactly where it should be, but just look to the right of that. Can you see that leaf that is kind of snapped over? Well, that was a spear leaf that has simply collapsed. And you can see there are already 2, 3, 4 roughly lower leaves that are already brown. This plant is already dead. Now, I have not seen the symptomology where it snaps off at the base, but you can see the rotting is already occurring at the butt of the palm. Now, again, this is a bacterial disease. So will we see a conch or a fruiting body? No, because they don't produce fruiting bodies. Fungi do, but not bacteria. Texas Phoenix palm decline. What's getting it around the area of Central Florida? We suspect Texas Phoenix palm decline is insect vectored, and it's a cold hardy insect. From our guest was with lethal yellowing and what moves it around. The vector will probably be a plant hopper or a tree hopper of some sort. You can Google search those terms for images of those particular grouping of insects. They both have piercing, sucking mouth parts, perfect for transmitting diseases. The host range of Texas Phoenix palm decline disease is simply unknown at this point. But we do know, because we have documentation, it has been documented in Phoenix canariensis, Canary Island date palm, Phoenix dactylifera, the date palm where you get edible dates, Phoenix sylvestris, the wild or Indian date palm or sylvester palm. It has several common names. Phoenix sylvestris, Phoenix reclinata. We don't generally see this one in landscapes. It produces clumps of trunks. It suckers up kind of a big plant, usually in large areas where it's planted. It's not a single trunk Phoenix species. So the Senegal date palm. Let's look to the left for a second. Currently, we have not been documenting it in Phoenix robellini, aka the robellini palm or pygmy date palm. That's good news. Does it mean it's immune? It's a potential host, it would be my opinion, but we haven't been able to document it. Maybe people just accept that it died and don't worry about it versus a tree that's towering over the home at 20, 30, or 40 feet. I'm not sure. We've also seen it in queen palms, and we've also seen it in our state tree, the cabbage palm. I mentioned sampling. Now people want to try to sample every last plant. Does it have it? Does it have it? Does it have it? The ones to sample are the ones that are beginning to show some symptomology. The one on the left doesn't show any symptoms of disease so far. Most of the leaves are still alive. There's some chlorosis at the bottom, but that's probably nutrient deficiency as a likelihood. Now the two on the right, they definitely have more lower leaves that are completely brown than which is typical. And because these are phoenix palms, it can be very hard to see the spear leaf. I suspect the one on the right would have a dead spear leaf if we kind of could be able to view it in 360 degrees of motion, but we're not able to in photographs. So for disease diagnosis, we do molecular assay because because we cannot otherwise culture them or plate them out like you would have done in a microbiology course somewhere along your life and times, whether in high school or a college course. Again, these can't be cultured, so we rely on molecular testing. We have to actually drill into the trunk to get trunk tissue. That is a deep wound. It's more than a flesh wound. It's a deep wound. You got to follow the directions, which I'll talk about in a moment. You're going to need a very large drill bit, about 3/8 inch or slightly larger, and 12 inches long. You're going to be going into that palm about halfway into the trunk or so. That is a large wound. It's not merely a flesh wound. I hope there's a Monty Python fan out there laughing at the moment. If not, rent a Monty Python film, especially if you're bored with this module. Alright, so here are the steps. I don't expect you to remember every minutia of it, but you should be generally familiar with what you would have to do if you were asked by a client. We do not go out and do the sampling. They're big boys and girls that can run a drill themselves. Well, maybe. Anyhow, you're going to have to start out with several pieces of equipment. You're going to need a drill that is fairly strong and powerful. It surprisingly dents the fibers of a palm tree trunk. Most cordless drills probably won't have enough muster to get through that. You're going to need a heat source, a high intensity heat source to disinfect your drilling equipment. The idea is to reduce any disease causing organisms that may be on the drill bit or on the trunk for that matter from entering this deep puncture wound. No, you do not flame the trunk to disinfect it. Do I need to tell that to you? I didn't think so, but anyhow, so let's start with A. You have a very long drill bit on there, 3/8 of an inch in diameter, and you can't quite see it in the photograph, but this is being heat treated for about 30 seconds or so to get good and hot. Be careful that you don't make the metal so hot that it'll start turning red, it's going to soften the metal. You just want to heat it up so it disinfects the boring tool. The next side of the photograph, B, you can see there's a squirt bottle. That's some distilled water. Sterile water would be better, but distilled water is fairly clean. That's just to cool off the drill bit. If you want to wait a few minutes, you could do that. So now, not going to the left-hand side, it's kind of going down to C. The person has the drill going in. You can see how deep that drill bit is, and he needs to go a little further. He practically went all the way of the threads, and he's collecting the trunk tissue, the fibers, quote, quote, wood, not truly wood as we know, into some kind of collection vessel. That could be some kind of a Tupperware type container or disposable Gladware or Ziploc thing. From there, you can transfer that if you wish to a zip bag. Now this needs to be cooled down fairly quickly and then mailed off to the disease clinic in Gainesville. Just kind of as an aside note, and it may have been talked about in the plant pathology modules, plant disease samples need to be shipped ideally at the beginning of the week so they don't sit in a hot post office or in a lab over the weekend deteriorating. Also, we want to make sure that the university doesn't have an upcoming holiday and may be closed for spring break, winter break, or something like that. So keep that in mind when advising clients. So, as we can see in D, he has some trunk tissue. That's probably the bare minimum. I probably try to get about twice as much if I could. There's a problem with sampling that I think I'll mention in a moment. I think there's a bullet point. If not, hopefully I will remember. Now in E, the university recommends that you put in that big gaping puncture wound, not merely a flesh wound, a Gulf tee just to kind of plug the hole. Remember, plants don't heal, they only seal. So you're kind of speeding it up a little bit. Now this is for you science geeks out there. Here is reading of an assay. Sorry about the lettering. Just before I started recording, I had to redo most of the slides for the font. It got weirded out. But look at what looks to be like barcoding that you have on a cereal box or any product that you buy nowadays that goes over the register and goes beep, beep, beep. You know what I'm talking about. And you can see LY, lethal yellows, and you can lethal yellowing, excuse me. You can see that the bars line up for one on the right and the one on the left. Notice when it says TPP and then the D should be there. Notice how they line up. Notice there's similarities between lethal yellowing and TPPD because they're cousin bacteria, but the lines that light up under special phosphorescence and all that are a little different. But this is a diagnostic characteristic barcode read, if you will. No, that is not truly the technical term for it, but that's Mr. Mall's simplified version of it. In other words, lumping versus splitting. That would read positive for Texas Phoenix palm decline if it were the middle three bars that you see versus the one on the left or the right. As far as the ones on the other side, don't ask me what that's about. Ask Dr. Whitney if you feel like that. All right, management. Remove the palm if more than 25% of the leaves are discolored or brown, or the spear leaf is dead. If the spear leaf is dead, there's no sense doing anything, drilling into the trunk to confirm it, or for that matter, any kind of treatment. It is not merely dead, it's most sincerely dead. Leaving disease, but still on the cusp living. Essentially, it's dead, but there's still green tissue for insects to feed. It just serves as a source of the phytoplasm for the vector to spread to other susceptible palms. Think of how we grow some of these phoenix palm species. We grow long rows going into our various communities, or we grow them in big clumps on various parts of a landscape. Once the bud is dead or heart, the palm will not continue to grow. It's not Lazarus. No new leaves will be produced. Here is one point Dr. Elliott wrote in this part of the module. It's okay to use the disease tree as a mulch since the pathogen is spread only by the insect vector, not necessarily the wood. I personally would get rid of it if it were me maintaining a big landscape. Oh, the lower photograph there is some species of plant hopper. Don't ask me which one, I'm lumping. I pretty much mentioned some of this, but here again, this is showing the sampling in the upper right-hand photograph with the drill. And this is, not sampling, excuse me, this is showing management of using antibiotics. Antibiotics can be used to prevent the disease and possibly even treat it in the very early stages of the disease in the tree. It has to be used when less than 25% of the leaves are discolored and the bud or the new spear leaf is not dead or brown. This is generally not the case when most people start noticing a problem with their palms. It's past the 25% quote rule unquote. What we do is we inject it prophylactically. That's a nice way of saying to prevent it, right? Prophylactically, what we do is we drill into it. It's a much smaller drill bit, and we put in what is dubbed a bullet, quote, quote. No, it's not ammunition. It's just the untechnical term for the injection system. You put the bullet in, quote, quote, and we inject it. In the lower photograph, you can see the syringe. We inject that bullet with oxytetracycline, OTC. While I may refer to it as OTC throughout the rest of this module, as a Master Gardener trainee, you should know OTC stands for oxytetracycline, which is an antibiotic. Now, some of you may have a medical background or even a degree in medicine for all I know, or maybe you've actually been on a tetracycline drug in your life at some point. These are the same oxytetracyclines that you may have taken at some point in your life, and we use for humans and sometimes in livestock. Does anyone see a potential for problems? Well, of course, antibiotics, the organism can become resistant. So, there are pros and cons to antibiotic injections. Ideally, I would start prophylactically injecting palms that are not symptomatic whatsoever. Most people wait till it's way too late. There's only one source of oxytetracycline labeled currently for injection into palms. It's called Tree Saver. and you can see the website. Tree Saver can be bought by the average Joe. You do not need a pesticide license to get this. Unfortunately, you usually have to buy about 100 of these injections at a time. They may have smaller ones now available, but the way I remember it, you had to buy quite a bit. So it's maybe something best done by a professional who has some knowledge of how to do it. Now, the problem with oxytetracycline and management of TPPD, you know, when do you start injecting? I mentioned prophylactically. Here are some coconut palms. I'm not sure where this photograph was exactly taken, but this has been injected for a number of go-arounds, possibly a number of years. And you can see wherever there's an injection site and a bullet, quote, quote, that there is weeping of sap. That's fairly normal. That's also fairly ugly. So, but you got to take the good, you got to take the bad, you got to take them both. And there you have. The facts of life are you make a deep puncture wound, plants can bleed or weep. Now, would I generally recommend OTC uniformly being injected throughout Pasco or Central Florida for that matter? It depends on how closely and how emotionally attached you are to your particular palms. Now, again, some of these Phoenix palms can run thousands of dollars a piece. So I do understand there's a huge economic investment, I should say, in these trees. Is a tree of a value? When I worked at Bach Tower Gardens, we had a lot of cabbage palms planted throughout the garden. Now, we could prophylactically inject those. We probably had 200 or 300 of the plants easily in the garden. That has to be done every 3 months, ad infinitum. For those people that don't know what ad infinitum means, it means on and on and on. Kind of like the way this module seems to be going right now, huh? Anyhow, I digress a little bit. So, if I were managing the palms at Bach Tower, which I certainly am not at the moment, I would inject only one of them. That was the one planted by President Calvin Coolidge in 1928. I would consider that one of high importance in the garden. The rest I would say, well, we're just going to have to live with what life throws at it. That's my opinion. Take what you like, leave the rest. Obviously, knowing something about the palms, maybe I would take a wait and see approach, keep on monitoring them. And when I first notice something not right, begin injections. That's easy for me to say who knows what to look for and may only have 1 or 2 at home. But if I'm managing a large property, that is not probably, very easily to do. I would only inject obviously susceptible palms. If it's not susceptible, let's say a Bismarck palm, which is cold, not very cold hardy, but another story for another time, I wouldn't inject that because that's not a known host or susceptible host of this particular bacterium. Oops. I went the wrong way. Sorry about that. So, Fusarium wilts of palms. We know of 4 currently in the state of Florida. Fusarium oxysporum, that's the scientific genus. Then we have Formae specialis. For you splitters, this is nirvana. Oh, you're welcome. For us lumpers, I'm sorry. But anyhow, we have Fusarium oxysporum, form of the species, Forma specialis canariensis. Obviously, it hits Phoenix canariensis, the Canary Island date palm, and it's virtually a worldwide known wilt of Canary Island date. Then we have Fusarium oxysporum, Formae specialis albidensis. Blah, blah, blah. I don't remember all that either. It primarily goes after Phoenix dactylifera, and it's known in Morocco, and Algeria. Thankfully, we don't apparently have it in Florida. That's subject to change. Then there's another Fusarium oxysporum, and it goes after another species of palm that is the African oil palms. Palm kernel oil. That's a species of palm that we do not grow in mainland U.S. except in a rare botanical garden specimen and some weird plant geeks that are in Hawaii or South Florida or maybe very southern Texas. So not a very common species of palm in ornamental horticulture. Then we have Fusarium oxysporum, forma specialis. Now it's called palmarum. Wow, what's in a name? And it was found here in Florida in the early 2000s. And it goes after our queen palms and our Washingtonians. So Fusarium wilts of queen palms and Washingtonian palms. We got a lot of reports in late 2000 of queen palms quickly declining. Now let's go back to the TPPD for a second. If we remember, TPPD started plugging up what vascular tissue? You remember? It was transmitted by an insect that pokes into the plant, sucks out the juices, and pokes its proboscis in the phloem tissue. That's very good. Now, phloem moves what primarily in the plant? Think about it. It moves food, primarily from the leaves downward, although there is some back and forth, up and down with various other components. Point is, those phloem limited diseases progress relatively slowly. Now here we're getting rather quick decline of queen palms. What part of the plant do you think is being affected? Possibly the roots? The leaves? Probably not, but somewhere in the vascular tissue, especially when we're talking wilt. So, which one can you live longer without, water or food? Yeah, well, you can live longer without food than you can water. So this is rapidly plugging up the xylem, the water-conducting tissue of a palm. So the palm looks good one day, and a handful of days later, a couple weeks later, it's essentially dead. From there, we got reports in 2007 of Washingtonian robusta, the Washingtonian palms, rapidly declining as well. So there was a lot of testing. It was suspected that it was a fusarium. But in doing a lot of testing and plating in this, we found a whole new form of the species of Fusarium oxysporum palmarum, which is so far currently located only in Florida. It's fairly widespread in the nursery and landscapes. It's not known anywhere else in the world. This is subject to change without prior notification to other parts of North America or planet Earth. That's my disclaimer. Has more than one host, in other words, species of palms. So here's a problem. Oops, another computer woke up. Love it. So, fusarium wilt. More dead leaves than would be normal for potassium deficiency. K is the symbol, the chemical symbol for potassium, if we remember back to our fertilizer modules. You also have brown petioles. Those are the leaf stem. With potassium deficiency, you'll have browning, but the petiole will still be green. Did you get that and write it down and put a little star behind that? It's very, very different. So the petiole will be brown, or one side of it may be brown when it's infected with fusarium. You won't see that if it is a potassium deficiency. But from this photograph, it would be very hard to diagnose what it is. Something is going on. And I ask people to either look at the petiole and tell me if it's brown or green. And they say, I can't tell. I'm amazed that people can't tell the difference between brown or green. Seriously? Gosh, I've learned my colors back before kindergarten. Anyhow, I digress. Here is not necessarily the best upper left-hand photograph of a palm but you can see the petiole has a dark brown streak running from the left of the photograph all the way to the green leaflets. If we go to the right hand side of the photograph, we can see in cross section where the brown is on the stem, and we're looking at the cross section, you can see there's a browned out area. The fungus is simply plugging up the conductive tissue. Notice the lower left hand photograph. Notice the petiole is brown. Really, people? You can't tell if that's brown or green? Oh boy. And they vote. So, and here is that same stem at the lower right hand photograph. Again, you can see the discoloration. The unaffected tissue is still a fairly creamy white or yellowish white color. Here you can see the leaflets start dying on one side of the petiole. That corresponds with the dark brown streak. It's hard to see in the palm frond in the upper left-hand photograph, the one on the left-hand side, but the one on the right-hand side is a little easier to see. You can see how the leaflets are dying distinctively on one side of the frond. Notice the lower right-hand photograph where you have that brown streak, and the leaflets on the left-hand side are correspondingly brown. Where it's still greenish and greenish yellow, those leaflets still appear to be okay. The same symptoms can happen with a rachis blight, which we will not talk about with any detail. Rachis blight really doesn't kill the palm, so it's one of those more nuisance things than anything else. Now, pruning equipment can transmit this disease. Probably pruning equipment can also be implicated in Texas Phoenix palm decline, in my personal and professional opinion, although other people do not feel that way. I feel that you should disinfect your pruning equipment between trees. Think about it. Would you want to be jabbed with a needle that just got wiped off from the person before you that got the injection? I don't think so. So here it is again. You can see the petiole, the brown, in the upper, or more the left-hand photograph. You can see the brown streak and the corresponding yellow and browning leaflets, whereas the other side is still apparently okay. Here's that same palm frond. Here you can see Dr. Elliott's foot in the left foot in the turquoise crock, and you can see the brown petiole, the brownness of the petiole on the left-hand side, and correspondingly the leaflets are dying. That's very diagnostic of a fusarium wilt, specifically the one that's here in Florida. Again, the leaflets are often desiccated and off color, especially early on. And then what will happen very quickly, they look great one day, and then the canopy has what we have dubbed the freeze-dried look. Now, if I were given this photograph and said, what's wrong with it? It's possible that could be a cold damage related palm issue. I would have to ask some more questions, whether it's me or you, a newbie, or a trainee, or a seasoned master gardener. What time of the year did this first show up? Well, if it showed up, in January, and we had a few cold nights, cold damage is probably high on my suspect list. If it's July and it recently showed up, I don't think we've had a frost or freeze in Florida in July. Or it's a snowball's chance in Florida in July to make it. So again, time of the year will kind of dictate as to which that could possibly be. But somehow the vascular system has rapidly declined. Here is how the disease progresses. Notice these have been removed from the plant. The bottom leaves are at the right-hand side of the picture. Sorry about the crazy font issues. I tried to fix all that, but didn't have enough time before recording today. Notice that the lowest couple three leaves are all brown. The fourth one is about 95% brown. The fifth one, going toward the left, is about 80%. Now, if somebody brings in all these completely brown bottom fronds, that's the ones they always bring in. And dead leaves, dead palms yield no tails, boys and girls. That I can't probably tell because it's just too far along. The leaf I'm looking for is the one that's kind of half good and half bad. That one right in the middle. One that has some browning on one side of the leaflet of the petiole and kind of yellow more so on the other side. And it's kind of that half-half one. Not completely good, not completely bad. That's the leaf I'm looking for ideally, or the next one to the left of that. That one too is kind of somewhere at the beginning of it. If you give me an all green one, I probably can't tell what it is either. It's very important that people bring in a very good sample and not just pick off a brown frond. The canopy typically does not collapse around the trunk. We're not exactly sure why. There's some theories that the fungus produces some sort of toxin that rapidly causes the cells of the xylem to decline and collapse. That's our best guess at this point in time. So fusarium wilt here on the left-hand side, notice all the leaves are brown and the sky is blue. And Texas Phoenix palm decline. Sorry about the wonky font, but you'll have to survive it, even if you're afraid and petrified. All right, so you can see that the spear leaf is already dead early on in Texas Phoenix palm decline, as we saw this photograph earlier. In fusarium wilt, the spear leaf is one of the last leaves to die. Did you catch that, boys and girls? In fusarium, the spear leaf is the last one to die. In Texas Phoenix palm decline, it dies fairly early on in the disease infection process. Oh, there's that hanging spear leaf. So what do we do for fusarium disease management? Remove the palm as soon as the disease is confirmed. People want to hold on to these dead plants in hopes that they'll come back. This is a fungal disease. If it produces spores, it's going to be moved by the wind. This can move long distances. This explains its widespread here in Florida. Reduce soil contamination by spores. If you get it out, dig out some of that root system. And whatever you do, don't replant a palm in that same area. If removed prior to spread of fungus to trunk, okay to mulch. That's Dr. Elliott's wording, not mine. And my feeling is if you have a diseased plant like a palm, best thing to do is remove it from the site and dispose of it. I would never recommend keeping any parts of it for composting, especially not the canopy. But again, if it's composted hot, which most people will not do, the theory is that it should kill the spores. Again, you know my feeling on that. Why no fungicides are recommended. California did some studies with other fusarium wilts and they found that fungicides were negative in doing any kind of treatment. Part of the probably is by the time we notice any symptomology, the fungus is inside the tissue and all we're doing is spraying the outside and not really getting it into the vascular system. I kind of like to equate things to my own personal life. It's kind of like if I got pneumonia and I went to the doctor and he would tell me, well, just rub a little antibiotic ointment on your chest, I would look at him like he's nuts. Because will that antibiotic ointment get into my lungs to treat my pneumonia? Of course not. So we have to take it orally. Well, the problem is spraying the outside of the tree with fungicides isn't really getting into the internal plumbing of the tree. That makes sense out there in online cyberland? I hope so. Diseases occur randomly, so we don't know if your tree is going to get it today or tomorrow or next month or next year. We do know that systemic fungicides, some of you are probably thinking, what about systemic ones? They accumulate large palms normally at the leaf tips. Now, where are we trying to treat? The vascular tissue. So it really doesn't work even with systemic fungicides. Other ways to control it culturally: disinfect pruning equipment in between each tree. Most landscape companies go down the plaza and do the whole tree up and down, and then they're out to the next job site. You're lucky if they disinfect them once a day. They may never disinfect them. This is one way the fungus could be moved on properties or from one property to the other. In likelihood, this is probably more common than we realize, but we simply don't know. If we remember back to pruning module, we can disinfect with chlorine bleach. I usually don't use it because it causes rusting of my pruning equipment, but it's an excellent disinfectant. Pine oil cleaner, that stinky stuff that great grandma used to clean her house. I know some people still use it. Oof, can't stand the smell of it, but it's a good disinfectant. I mentioned this before in the pruning modules. Trisodium phosphate is very highly alkaline, so keep it off your skin or out of your eyes. It is very caustic, but it is a good disinfectant. It will also cause your pruning equipment to rust, so I generally do not recommend it. Quaternary ammonium salts, these are quote hospital type disinfectants. In some cases, this can be found in cans of Lysol. Alcohol can also be used as a disinfectant, but like Lysol, which can be either a quaternary ammonium based and or alcohol based disinfectant, both are flammable, so be careful around powered equipment. You should allow that alcohol to dry. Ideally, we already know from palms and pruning that you only want to remove dead fronds and stop over trimming, and hurricane cuts are bad, and reduce or eliminate nutritional deficiencies. It'll make it easier to detect diseases. Also, think about it. If you are eating properly and getting the proper nutrients, you're more resistant to diseases. And it works the same in plants. All right, let's take a little quiz. So if somebody sends in a photograph, I have a palm, it's dead. What caused it to die? Trust me, this is usually what you get sent to you in photography: dead plants. Now, as I said earlier before, in fusarium wilt, usually the canopy doesn't start to droop or wilt. Remember, it has that freeze-dried place or frozen in place, so this canopy is drooping. Now, if this plant had fusarium, let's say had, it may be that this photograph was taken 2 or 3 years after the disease infection and it did start to wilt, for all I know. But I'm going to probably downplay fusarium. Now, we didn't see necessarily Texas Phoenix palm decline causing that. I have seen it when palms have been hit by lightning and the leaves fold downward like that. It could also be insects, for all I know. But again, I will stress this very clearly here: dead plants don't yield any tails. I can tell you exactly what's wrong with it, though, with authority. It's dead. Its causal agent is unknown. I can possibly narrow down some thoughts based on the timeline. When was the last time this palm looked good? Well, the last time it looked good to me was a year ago. I literally had this conversation, no photographs. The canopy is collapsed, palm is dead. What killed it? Wow. Well, talking to the gentleman, last time he saw him, it was a year earlier. Well, it could be a heart rot or a bud rot. It could be a butt rot. It could be Texas Phoenix palm decline. It could have been a lightning strike. I gave him 4 possibilities and he just said, I'm not sure. Maybe I should talk to a horticulturist. Ouch, that hurt. Anywho, dead plants yield no tails, folks. So when people want to know what killed it, it's hard to tell, even for a professional that's been doing it for many years. Here is something I think you should all print off: our normal abnormalities in palms. And you can see the EDIS website, and you can see the fact sheet number. And this is something, after you're done with this module, go to your computer, go to the search engine of your choosing, and find it. I also recommend you print it off in color. There's about 24 normal abnormalities, quote, quote, of palms that we frequently get asked about. Because there's so many and some of them are just not really applicable to Central Florida, I'll let you keep that as part of your resources as your Master Gardener notebook. There's no such thing as a perfect tree or palm. Diversity of palms and dicots in the landscape is essential. Sorry, this is where the font goofed up again. And we don't know what's going to come in the next 5 years or 10 years. When I first started an extension in the late 1990s, Phoenix palm species, queen palm species, Washingtonia had really essentially no problems. We would have called them bulletproof plants. That's no longer the case. Kind of sad. Let's end palm problems right here and join me in some other modules. I'm not sure what's coming up next, but it'll be good.